Thank you. Thank you very much. I am so honored and thrilled to be with you today, particularly pleased to be joined by two new Canadian colleagues who will speak following my remarks. I'm so pleased to as well join many Canadians of Iranian background who are watching online across the country. I'm also very pleased to say hello to my friends at Camp Ashraf. I'm sorry that I can't be physically with you today, but I want you to know my heart and my enthusiasm are with you today. There's one group of people we know who are also watching. There are millions of people in Iran who are watching today's event online, or who will watch it online. And I want to say to you very clearly, the people of Iran, that the Canadian people are with you in your great struggle. One of the proudest moments that I had in public life over 20 years in government was the day when Canada made a big decision 10 years ago. We said that we wanted nothing to do with the terrorist-supporting, human rights violating regime in Tehran. We formally broke off diplomatic relations with the regime, and we kicked the mullah's henchmen out of Canada. That was real Canadian leadership. There will be a day when Madame Rajavi will kick the mullahs from power in Tehran. Razi's installation as president is clear evidence that it is deeply afraid of the uprisings going on across Iran. The mullahs have made a radical hardliner president with the blood of 30,000 freedom fighters on his hands. Western leaders must understand the charade, the myth of reform, and that appeasement is possible in Iran is simply a mirage. It has failed for more than 40 years. I am also really pleased to be able to recognize the moral leadership and courage of the president of Slovenia. He has called on Raisi to account for the 1988 massacre of 30,000 MEK prisoners. He has angered the zealots and the mullahs, and friends, he should wear that as a badge of honor. The world needs more leadership like this. I want to join you in calling for accountability for this regime's human rights violations, for its mass murders, and for its repression, and for its support of terrorism, not just in the region, but frankly, around the world. And I have a message for Ibrahim Raisi. You are not a legitimate leader. You were not a legitimately elected president. The Iranian people will hold you to account for your actions, and the world will hold you accountable for the blood on your hands. Madam Rajavi, I am so pleased to call you a friend. I admire your courage. I admire your leadership. I admire your 10-point plan. We in Canada stand with you to pursue a better day for the people of Iran. Next year, let's hope we can meet and gather in a free Tehran. Howzer, howzer, howzer.
Bonjour à toutes et à tous, et d'abord toutes mes salutations amicales à Mariam Rajavi. Je voudrais remercier votre présidente de m'avoir invité une nouvelle fois à venir participer à votre grand rassemblement annuel. C'est vrai que ce rassemblement, une fois de plus, se passe dans des conditions particulières. Le Covid ne nous permet pas de nous rencontrer directement, ce que je préfère d'une façon générale, mais heureusement, la technologie nous permet néanmoins de dialoguer. Et je pense que dans cette période, c'est important effectivement de pouvoir continuer à entretenir des relations, pouvoir continuer à réfléchir ensemble à ce qui se passe dans le monde. Un monde toujours plus complexe, un monde qui a besoin de personnalités telles que Mariam Rajavi, avec son attachement aux droits de l'homme, son attachement aux valeurs démocratiques, son attachement à la laïcité et aux droits des femmes à pouvoir s'exprimer. Alors oui, Mariam Rajavi, je vous souhaite une nouvelle fois de pouvoir continuer longtemps à mener ce combat pour vos idées, pour vos valeurs, qui est le vôtre. Mesdames et messieurs, depuis la dernière fois que j'ai eu l'occasion de m'entretenir avec vous, il y a un événement majeur pour toute démocratie qui s'est passé en Iran. Cet événement majeur, c'est l'élection présidentielle. Et c'est vrai que dans tous les pays démocratiques, l'élection présidentielle, c'est un moment particulier, le moment probablement le plus intense pour une démocratie. Celui où l'ensemble des citoyens choisissent celle ou celui qui sera le président, c'est-à-dire qui donnera les grandes applications, les grandes orientations en fonction de ce que veulent d'ailleurs les citoyens, celui également qui est en charge de préparer l'avenir, celui qui est en charge de représenter le pays à l'extérieur. Oui, c'est pour cela, et parce qu'il y a à la fois cet enjeu majeur pour le futur, mais aussi la participation de tous les citoyens, qu'une élection présidentielle est un moment fort dans une démocratie. Hélas, ce moment a pris un aspect particulier en Iran, loin de ce que l'Union européenne attend et espère pour un grand pays comme l'Iran. D'abord, la première des choses et qui est contraire au principe démocratique, c'est que le choix même des électeurs a été restreint. Normalement, on choisit son président parmi un grand nombre d'hommes et de femmes qui sont candidats. Il ne s'agit pas de principes occidentaux, il ne s'agit pas de principes américains, il ne s'agit pas de principes asiatiques. C'est le principe de l'idée même de la démocratie. C'est la première lacune en ce qui concerne la première atteinte au principe démocratique. Mais ensuite, il y en a eu une autre, qui est d'ailleurs probablement liée à celle dont je viens de parler. Probablement parce que l'élection était en quelque sorte jouée d'avance. Mais ce que je dis aussi, c'est qu'il y a un certain nombre de valeurs communes qui dépassent les pays, qui sont au-dessus de cela. Et dans ces valeurs, il y a la démocratie. Dans ces valeurs, il y a le respect des droits des femmes, l'égalité des femmes. Il y a le respect du droit à s'exprimer. Il y a le respect de l'opposition. C'est tout cela, aujourd'hui, qui manque. Et on a vu à travers la grande abstention et le ras-le-bol qui est exprimé par un certain nombre d'Iraniennes et d'Iraniens qu'il faut que l'Iran bouge dans ce domaine. Il est évident que le monde entier compte sur un Iran qui soit un facteur de paix et de stabilité. Pour cela, c'est aussi aux Iraniennes et aux Iraniens eux-mêmes de montrer qu'ils ne sont pas d'accord avec certaines options qui sont prises aujourd'hui.
Dear Madam Maryam Rajavi, President-elect of National Council Resistance, Iran, it is a great honor indeed to address this important yearly event of the Iranian resistance, taking place at an extremely critical juncture for the international community and for the Iranian people. Now it is the time to get rid of the genocidal regime of the mullahs. The awareness about their crimes and the quest for freedom, justice, dignity, and a decent life are strongly felt by all who are committed to help those who are suffering under the cruelty and the corruption of the dictatorial regime. And this is especially true in the case of Iran. A large number of ex-officials and former ministers is attending this NCRI summit. They have been in charge of decision-making in their countries, and they are participating today because they are concerned about mullahs' human rights violations, secret nuclear program, Iran's meddling in other countries' affairs. By their attendance and their contribution to our discussion, these personalities intend to draw the attention of European and world readers to the fact that now, with the election of the Iran president, of a mass murderer, the criminal nature of the regime is officially certified. The Iranian people have widely boycotted this sham election. 1,200 MEG supporters inside Iran have documented from polling stations in 400 with more than 3,500 clips the extensive boycott of the election. Less than 10% of the eligible voters did cast their ballots. They did it at the price of being arrested and tortured. Many Western governments and parliaments expressed concern about the inhumane policies and actions of the Iranian regime. Still, many people, both in the United States and in Europe, have a clear responsibility in doing nothing to prevent these horrors. By making unnecessary and unfair concessions to the regime, Western governments show to the mullahs that they can enjoy impunity, that their crimes will remain unpunished. So the Iranian regime becomes tougher and tougher. The newly elected president of the Islamic Republic of Iran, Ebrahim Raisi, is a mass murderer. He was in charge of the 1988 massacre of innocent political prisoners, dissidents and protesters who were just seeking their freedom, freedom of thought, freedom of religion, political freedom. Most of them were killed by Raisi's orders simply because they stood on their beliefs as MEG supporters. It is time to stand side by side with the great Iranian people to finally put an end to a bloody tyranny. The fast track Raisi obtained to gain the presidency was a clear sign of the Supreme Guy's desire to have a president willing and ready to carry out the most heinous and bloody repressions against any opposition or dissidents, a loud warning to Western leaders seeking to renegotiate the JCPOA. The 2015 nuclear deal has neither prevented internal repression and bloodshed nor military aggression throughout the region or sponsoring of terrorist activities. European and US governments should not forget the extreme suffering inflicted on the Iranian people whenever they agree to meet with representatives of a regime. Neither has the nuclear agreement curbed Tehran's aspiration to have nuclear weapons and a missile program in blatant violation of the UN Security Council Resolution 2331, and the nuclear program, in spite of the IAEA bans, raising uranium enrichment to 60%, very close to the breakout capacity for a nuclear bomb. About Iran's support of terrorism, we all know the real face of the regime and the threats we faced in Villepin 3 years ago with the terrorist plot engineered by the regime and almost executed by Assadollah Assadi, the regime's diplomat spy based in Vienna. For the first time in Europe, a national court ruled about and sanctioned a terrorist plot as clearly ordered by the regime leadership, inflicting the maximum penalty to Assadollah Assadi and his accomplices. It is high time for the European governments to establish an Euro-Atlantic front to effectively face the threats coming from Iran. A good opportunity is the resolution signed by the majority of the US Congress to condemn violations of human rights and state terrorism perpetrated by the Iranian government. Bipartisan appeal coming from US lawmakers is a call to collaborate with European allies in order to dismantle the dense network of operatives taking advantage of diplomatic coverage of his embassies in our continent. It is necessary to take a firm action against embassies and consular offices, as in the cases of Vienna and Tirana, which are responsible for providing Iranian regime cover and assistance to terrorist activities. These outposts of mullah's terror must be immediately closed and definitely removed. It is no more acceptable to deal with those like Ebrahim Raisi, who have on their hands the blood of tens of thousands of Iranian people. He is the perpetrator also of countless crimes against humanity and human rights. And for this reason, he is blacklisted by the US Treasury and has been blacklisted since November 2019. The names of all these victims must be engraved on the hearts and minds of every decent human being. They must be remembered as collective memory of all peoples and governments which rely upon a world where justice, freedom, respect of human dignity must be assured and implemented. Now the further question is, what should we do? Should we acknowledge the reality of this medieval regime because there is nothing we can do? No, this is not, absolutely not the case. The regime is weak. It is facing numerous crises and an explosive society. The strikes have spread already across Iran and are increasing every day. Now, just a few days after the sham election of Raisi, the petrochemical workers are protesting throughout the country, demanding higher pay to keep up with the skyrocketing inflation, which is now above 50%. In these circumstances, we should look to the organized and effective democratic alternative with its competent leadership. The pillar of this alternative and its strength and steadfastness has come about through the Iranians' struggle against the Shah's regime and inside the Shah's prison. Masoud Rajavi, who led the Mex movement against the previous dictatorship that ruled Iran, foresaw exactly what the whole world sees today about the mullah's behavior. He courageously and very bravely uttered 40 years ago, and I quote, "This regime is incorrigible. It cannot make reforms and it must go." Masoud Rajavi said about this regime from day one, he said that the viper does not give birth to a dove, and this has been fully demonstrated today. That is why the mullah's regime does everything it can to eliminate the MEC and the NCRI, to eliminate them as the only democratic alternative to Iran. It even opens the way for and helps the remnants of the Shah's monarchy to appear as an opposition group competing with the MEC and with the NCRI in order to deviate attentions from the true alternative, which is threatening the regime. If we seriously consider all the aspects of the Iranian situation, nothing points to the regime's survival in Iran. Iran has a powerful alternative which inspires and motivates the Iranian people. It motivates the Iranian people to resist such a fight against the regime and to resist corruption and cruelty of the regime itself. Today, if the West wants to be effective, the best way of doing this is to acknowledge the democratic alternative that the corrupt clerical regime is trying to hide under a tremendous amount of demonization and through the buying of the media and journalists and many other ways. Thank you very much.
Madame la Présidente, Mesdames et Messieurs, ladies and gentlemen. Is Iran a normal state? Does it deserve the name of terrorist state? All these countries around Iran are concerned, and they are all protested about Iranian bellicism, so-called the Islamic Revolution dimension. Iran just elected a new president, Ibrahim Raisi, an extremist and, if we believe United Nations wording, a criminal. The formula is a grim reminder of the crisis of immunity. I want to address the Iranian people about this evolution. Is it nationalism? Is it hégémonisme? This is dictature. Depuis la venue de Khomeini en France, et même avant, je suis le plus attentivement possible les soubresauts de la politique au Moyen-Orient et très spécialement la politique de Téhéran. Nous en connaissons les grandes lignes et nous affinons nos opinions en fonction des changements des politiques internationales et de nos connaissances. Mais aujourd'hui, après les élections dont nous devons tirer quelques conclusions, c'est donc lui, Ali Khamenei, en ce moment, 82 ans, qui a arbitré par avance, qui a sélectionné les candidats, et les élections viennent de nommer un extrémisme qui s'appelle Ibrahim Raisi. Alors notons qu'en Iran, on ne dit pas élection, on dit sélection. Parce que sélection, ça veut dire que c'est en réalité l'imam qui a interdit aux figures conservatrices, aux gens un peu plus ouverts, de se présenter à ces mêmes élections et qui a donc élu Ibrahim Raisi. Entrons donc dans cette histoire qui est très pesante, très prégnante. Comment les Iraniens ont-ils interprété cette élection? D'abord, ils ne l'ont pas beaucoup interprétée eux-mêmes parce que plus de la moitié des Iraniens présents en Iran n'ont pas voté. Et donc, c'était en effet pour se doter extraordinairement dictatorial et assassin toute sa vie. Alors, qu'est-ce qu'on croit? On croit que cet homme, si on lit les textes des Nations Unies ou d'Amnesty International, cet homme a été à l'origine de la torture ou de l'exécution de milliers d'Iraniens. Il a été le procureur général de plusieurs régions, puis le procureur général de l'Iran, puis finalement la figure centrale de l'entreprise judiciaire, si je peux dire, de la justice iranienne. Donc il a choisi, à 82 ans, d'avoir éventuellement un successeur, M. Raisi, qui était un ultra-conservateur. Alors si on veut bien croire les textes des Nations Unies, et moi je les crois, ce président nouveau était passible d'une enquête internationale pour complicité de crimes contre l'humanité. Donc cette élection est une manière d'insulte pour les militants des droits de l'homme. On l'accuse entre autres d'être membre de ce qu'on appelait la commission de la mort, qui a fait le choix, à partir de milliers de gens qui devaient être condamnés, de ceux qui allaient mourir et de ceux qu'on jetait dans les fosses communes ou dont on brûlait les corps. Donc, en matière de droits de l'homme, c'est évidemment un personnage tout à fait détestable. Donc pendant 14, puis après, en fait pendant 40 ans, Ibrahim Raisi a été un des, comment dirais-je, tortureurs ou un des exécutants en charge, avec la complicité évidemment de la présidence, de l'imam, etc., un des personnages les plus, comment dirais-je, une espèce de frayeur mondiale qui se manifestait à son encontre. C'est-à-dire que les militants des droits de l'homme, c'est un épouvantail pour eux. Et donc c'est lui qui maintenant présidera, a été interrogé sur ce qui se passerait si les efforts de Vienne, vous savez qu'à Vienne il y a des pourparlers pour qu'on revienne à une politique plus ouverte et d'entente sur ce qui avait constitué un grand progrès sur la stratégie atomique éventuelle, la stratégie nucléaire de l'Iran. Alors maintenant, on a interrogé Raisi en tentant de renouer l'accord qui avait eu lieu et qui se discute encore à Vienne en ce moment sur le contrôle du programme nucléaire de l'Iran. Et M. Raisi aurait dit, je ne suis pas sûr, qu'il était partisan de cette ligne stratégique, ce qui est le contraire de ce qu'il a fait toute sa vie, puisque depuis 20 ans, il a été procureur et décidait de la mort des gens. J'espère que c'est vrai, j'en doute beaucoup. Merci.
morning, and thank you very much for inviting me to take part in this very important debate with such a stellar array of other speakers. The Iranian people have a proud and distinguished history. Persia's cultural artifacts are scattered around the world's great museums, including here at the British Museum in London. Its rich legacy in literature, music, dance, and poetry have affected cultures across the world, from Omar Khayyam to chess. It pains us to see what it has become in the hands of narrow-minded, bigoted fanatics. Iran's history did not begin on the 1st of February 1979 with Ayatollah Khomeini's return from exile in Paris. In the meantime, we have to deal with a dangerous, draconian, and destabilizing regime which oppresses its own people and exports fanaticism and instability to its own region and beyond. Under his leadership, the IRGC has tightened its grip on Iranian society and especially its economic infrastructure, locking out the opportunity to themselves and to the whole nation that the natural innovation of the Iranian people could bring. None of us have any quarrel with the Iranian people, but with the regime that increasingly oppresses them, that exports violence and instability to its neighbors, and which threatens to provoke conflict through its attempt to become a nuclear weapon state. The root of Iran's exports of instability lie in the ambition of Khamenei and his cronies to be the leaders not only of Shia Islam, but of Islam itself. There is a carefully crafted strategy whose design is to replace national identity with religious fervor, aimed at creating a new radicalized generation. In neighboring states like Bahrain, they try to persuade young men that they are not Bahrainis first with their own national identity, but they are Shia first, owing their allegiance to religious leaders in Iran rather than to the culture and laws of the nation in which they have been brought up. It is a pattern that is repeated over and over again in the region. No better examples can be seen than their willingness to spread division and violence in Iraq and Syria as a means of fostering the ambitions of Iran's leadership. But their own malign influence is not confined to their immediate neighbors. Even as European countries sought ways to try and finance trade with the Iranian regime, Iranian-inspired terror groups were increasing their activities across the European continent. In the Netherlands, 2 Iranian diplomats were expelled in June 2018 for plotting political assassinations in the country. A bomb plot to target a rally of opposition groups in Paris was foiled by French intelligence. And here in the UK, a terrorist cell with links to Iran was caught stockpiling tons of ammonium nitrate explosives on the outskirts of London at a secret bomb factory. Iran has been a consistent supporter of US-designated Palestinian terrorist organizations, including Palestinian Islam Jihad and Hamas. Lebanese Hezbollah remains Iran's primary terrorist proxy. The group's general secretary, Hassan Nasrallah, bluntly declared that Hezbollah gets its money and arms from Iran, and as long as Iran has money, so does Hezbollah. Internationally, the great piece of unfinished business is the JCPOA, the attempt to stop Iran becoming a nuclear weapon state. I always believed that the agreement was fundamentally flawed. It was neither credible nor responsible to see Iran's nuclear ambitions outside its support and encouragement for its terror proxies, and the original aim of stopping Iran from becoming a nuclear weapon state had morphed into a deal merely to put its ambitions on hold for a decade or so, even before the deal was concluded. Iran was immediately rewarded for signing, not implementing the agreement, by the immediate unfreezing of $150 billion worth of Iranian assets. The effect of the financial settlement was that Iran got what it wanted in terms of economic relief at the start, with mere promises of delivery later on. Repeated breaches of international law on the development of ballistic missile systems begs the question that if a nation has nothing that it wishes to deliver by such a system, why would it spend so much money at a time of great hardship for its own people on such technology? An agreement with Iran may be possible, but it must take account of Iran's human rights abuses, its export of terror, and its attempt to destabilize its regional neighbors. Above all, we must return to the position that we will stop, not delay, Iran's nuclear weapon ambitions. Wishful thinking may be an attractive idea, but it's a very poor basis for foreign or security policy.
Thanks to honorable ministers, Sheikh Michel Mari, Mr. Liam Fox, Mr. Kousner, and Mr. Tertzi. Thank you for your presence in this gathering and your remarks. Cher Michel, merci pour votre discours. Comme toujours, avec votre connaissance de la nature de ce régime, vous avez très bien expliqué ce que la communauté internationale doit faire, surtout que maintenant, un des auteurs du massacre de 88 est devenu le président des Mollahs. Donc, tout est clair et il faut agir. Monsieur Kousner toujours souligne l'importance des droits de l'homme. C'est vraiment précieux et rare dans le monde d'aujourd'hui. Mr. Liam Fox has always stressed the importance of adopting a decisive policy against the clerical regime, and I remember what Mr. Tertzi said, that any deal or agreement with this regime is not acceptable anymore. A decisive policy must be followed against this regime. This is a fact that has been proven today more than ever before, and all the illusions about the possibility of reform and moderation in this regime have now disappeared. Once again, thank you very much all.
صدای ملت ایران که میخیزد ز قلب ما به هر کوی و به هر میدان. منم ایران پهلوان، سرای پاک سرداران، منم گهواره پاکان، نیم من خانه دیوان. منم ایران، منم ایران که پویم راه آزادی، فروزم راه فرزندم، درفش همت و رایی. چنان پاکی گران دارم به بازوی وطن خواهان که بر سندان خاک از بن کند کاخ ددان ویران. تو بازو شو تو ایرانی، بیا در حلقه یاران که این بازوی هم بسته بود بر درد من درمان. منم پرچم که گلگونه ز خون سرخ رزماور، بیا سبز و سپیدم کن تو ای همراه، تو ای یاور. بیا در اعتزاز آمد درفش وحدت ملی، تو بازو شو بر این پرچم، بیا هم بسته هم پیمان. منم شورشگر و عصیان، منم ایران، منم ایران.
Dear Iranian friends, ladies and gentlemen, I'm really privileged to be part of your annual important meeting. Although remotely, I wanted to address you, to convey my greetings and best wishes to your courageous leader, Maryam Rajavi, and to all of you. I hope that COVID-19 is soon over and we are able to meet physically and share this appointment to many, if not all, of you. Unfortunately, we in the European Parliament, indicating difficult history, in particular indicating the crimes perpetrated by Mullah's regime in 1988, are not satisfied with this result either. I think it means humiliation to whole international community, and be sure that we are with you, that we want to raise the issue of human rights in Iran, of genuine rights of Iranian people to have their sovereign country, democratic, beneficial to all ordinary people, and developing in the way enabling them to live peacefully. All the best.
One of outrage at the recent election and the election of a man who is universally condemned as one of the systemic violators of human rights, a man condemned by Amnesty International, someone who has been the regime's enforcer, and someone who stands accused of gross human rights violations, particularly the execution of thousands of political prisoners in Tehran in 1988. One is sort of hopeless when something like that happens, because how can the regime even expect us to meet with this person, to talk to this person? How can we conduct politics with a butcher like that? So it's, I'm afraid, not a sign of hope. It's a sign of the regime being intransigent and of defying the world and international norms. Regimes seem to be most secure and stable just because before they fall. So I just hope so Iran will one day build a secular democracy that respects rule of law, human rights, and Iran and the people of Iran rejoin the family of free and prosperous nations. And I can assure you that the European Parliament will continue to monitor events very closely and to stand up for human rights that every human being in the world deserves. Thank you. Good luck in your struggle.
Dear friends, let me tell you how happy I am to be able to join you in this magnificent international summit for free Iran. I have been many years in politics, be it in my own country, Slovakia, when I was Minister of Foreign Affairs for 10 years, and later in the European Parliament in Brussels, where I also was deputy for 10 years. My acquaintance and friendship with the representatives of the opposition PMOI representatives in Brussels is something I am really proud of. I'm very well aware of their commitment and fight for the freedom in Iran. I participated in many meetings of the Friends of Iran, and I have met your leader, Madame Maryam Rajavi, for several times. And from my own experience, I know that there are many European politicians who are supporting Madame Rajavi and the movement she leads. Now we are having this online summit after the election, so-called elections in Iran. And these so-called elections brought new president to Iran, Mr. Ibrahim Raisi. But we know that he was the personal pick of the supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, to become president. So now we are facing Iran with the president Ibrahim Raisi. It means that the game of soft line, hard line is over. No more deceiving of the public, no more fooling of the international community. The European Union has to face this new situation in a strong way. We cannot close our eyes over the violations which this theocratic regime in Iran does, its repression of women and its crushing the opposition. The situation cannot go back to normal as long as the Iranian regime is doing this. And it should be clear for the European Union, for the European Union High Representative for the Foreign Policy, Mr. Joseph Borrell, that it's not possible to behave in a normal way as long as the situation in Iran prevails. I think that there is a situation in Iran which calls for the new uprising. I think that people of Iran have enough. They deserve much, much better than they had for the over 40 years of this regime. So let me finish by saying that I urge all Iranians to support Madame Rajavi for this just fight. And we, the Europeans, it is our duty to support this movement in Iran to bring the democratic, normal life for the population of Iran. So I wish you all the best in that fight. Thank you.
Good evening to everybody, esteemed colleagues, dear Iranian freedom fighters, especially those who are speaking from within the Iran. I know it needs a lot of courage and it's a huge risk. A lot have been said today about situation in Iran, and I don't want to repeat about a person who has been appointed as a president and who was involved in a very serious crime against humanity. I want to talk about some, let's say, attitude towards the events in Iran, in Europe. Today we hear talks about the possibility that the United States sanctions are removed as a part of a revival of nuclear accord. We can just imagine how tempting it would be for the mullah's regime to use oil revenues to fund his economic and military goals and to strengthen the internal pressure apparatus. But even in this difficult situation, at home, it should be clear that Raisi is not prepared to compromise on nuclear talks. And in his first interview with the media, he has made it clear that it is the West who should make all the sided concessions. Nevertheless, the question remains, even if he did accept to compromise on issues like nuclear, ballistic missiles, destabilizing activities in the region, the question remains, should Europe turn its back to its democratic human rights principles and hold dialogue with a man who is a criminal against humanity? I am sure that no, or at least I hope. The EU has not sanctioned any Iranians for human rights violations since 2013, when an interim deal on Iran's nuclear program was reached, despite major abuses, such as those detailed in a United Nations report released this March. But the EU has several times condemned Tehran for the human rights violations. Just in April 2021, after 8 years of silence, the European Parliament voted to impose sanctions on Iran in the framework of the EU Global Human Rights Sanctions regime, so-called EU Magnitsky Act, established by the Council of Ministers in December. The Council then decided to extend its restrictive measures responding to a serious human rights violations in Iran until 13th April 2022, adding 8 persons and 3 entities to the sanctions list in view of their role in the violent response to the November 2019 demonstrations in Iran. This modest list now comprises a total of 89 individuals and 4 entities. Dear colleagues, we cannot forget with whom we are dealing. Iran is the country that persecutes the opposition by using capital execution. They execute sportsmen, journalists, and even minors in a large numbers. And here I just want to express my sincere support to the Slovenian Prime Minister Janša, later supported by Senator Lieberman. We have to push for President Raisi to be investigated by the International Court of Justice for crimes against humanity, including murder, forced disappearance, and torture. One might say that we as Europeans have no other choice but to talk with him, as we have no other interlocutor in Iran. But actually, there is an interlocutor in Iran to whom we can talk. If we stand on the side of Iranian people who have boycotted the recent presidential elections and do not want Raisi as their president, when we will see that Iran has a democratic alternative, the National Council of Resistance of Iran. Let us stand with them and the people of Iran, and let us force this theocratic dictatorship to understand that the Europe will not turn a blind eye to the crimes committed by this regime, and particularly by Raisi. And we know what does mean to live in bondage. Once again, I wish Iranian people all the best, and please know Lithuania always will stand with you. Thank you for your kind attention.
اینجا زندان گوهردشته. الان ساعت 11 یکشنبه 9 مرداد سال 67. منو از فریه 8 صدا کردن. من دیگه بر نمیگردم. از 3 روز پیش قتل عام تو اوین شروع شد. تو گوهردشت از دیروز با اعدام بچه‌های مشهد شروع کردن. امروز از صبح رفتن سراغ کرجی‌ها. هر کی میگه اتهامم مجاهدین اعدام میشه. 30,000 تا شاید هم بیشتر تو این قتل عام اعدام میشن. این آزمایش نسل ماست. سراغ ملیکش‌ها هم رفتن. اونایی که حکمشون هم تموم شده همه اعدام میشن. به مریضامون هم رحم نمیکنن. حتی محسن محمد باقر و ناصر منصوری هم که فلج و قطع نخواهی هستن اعدام میشن. تو اوین هم قوقاست. بچه‌ها برای دفاع از اسم مجاهد سر از پا نمیشناسن. رئیسی و پور محمدی کلافه شدن. اینجا هم ناصریان کم آورده. میگه سازمان با شما چیکار کرده که تو صف اعدام از هم جلو میزه. راستی یه ساعت پیش زهرا خسروی این پیامو با مرس از سلول انفرادی به ما رسوند. به من 20 دقیقه وقت دادم وصیت‌نامه بنویسم. اعدام بچه‌ها رو شروع کردم و منم تا چند دقیقه دیگه اعدام میشم. سلاممو به مسعود و مریم برسونید.
صدایی که تو گلومه از صدای شماست، شورشی که تو قلبمه از شکوه راه شماست. آهای شما که پر کشیدید و رفتید، جاتون همیشه سبز، جاتون همیشه شعله‌ور. ما کانونهای شورشی راه شما رو به آخر میرسونیم. میدونیم روز آزادی فرا میرسه.
Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, it is my honor to address this event on behalf of the Democratic Party of Albania, a member of the European People's Party and of the International Democrat Union. The Iranian people's aspiration for freedom, democracy, and respect for fundamental human rights and liberties has had and will continue to have the full solidarity and support of the Democratic Party of Albania and myself. The recurring acts of unprovoked aggression and violence by the Iranian government against its own people, against its neighbors, and against the global community of nations have hurt countless lives of Iranian and other citizens in the region and around the world. From torture and murder, to the violent suppression of political manifestations, to harboring, aiding, and launching terrorist organizations, the Iranian regime has proven that it is willing to break the most essential norms of international order at the cost of innocent lives and regional stability. Today's event, however, confirms that in the face of such malignant adversity, the international community's resolve to counter these threats is not weakened, but only strengthened. The Democratic Party of Albania has a clear and outspoken position. We stand firmly against the Iranian regime attempts to illegal and terrorist practices on our soil and to its structured enterprise to export fundamentalism to Albania and to our region. We support the Iranian people and their goal for a democratic and non-nuclear Iran. We support the Iranian people's desire for change and commend Madam Rajavi and her efforts to offer the people of Iran the perspective of a free, secular, and democratic country. In Albania, we know very well that the price of freedom extols a heavy toll on oppressed nations. But we also know that there is no other path towards a better future than the path of struggle for the fundamental rights of all human beings, for dignity, for freedom, for democracy, and equality before the law. I would like to thank you, Madam Rajavi, and all of you for your sacrifices and efforts for a better future for all the people of Iran. You can continue to count on our full support. Thank you, and God bless you all.
Dear Mr. Bashar, thank you for your participation in this year summit. Your firm position against Iranian terrorist activities in Albania and also commitment to Iranian people aspiration for a free and democratic Iran is admirable. Thank you again, and thank you very much.